In Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 13, God makes a promise to Israel, and by extension, a promise to us, his people. He says, I will make you the head and not the tail. You shall be above only and not be beneath, if you would listen to my voice and obey me. To be the head means to be above, to be the initiator, to be superior, and to be favored. He said, I would make you to be above, to be superior, to be favored, and to be the initiator. The head is the beginning. To be the tail is to be beneath, to be inferior and subordinate. God's calling to his people is to be the head and not the tail. And I believe that he has called you to be the head and not the tail. And in these days, in this season, many Christians are going to rise into headship over nations, over corporations, over entities, over communities, because we are coming into our own. We're coming into our space. The human society generally is built around systems, and there are about 7 pillars of the human society. I'll go through them very quickly. The first is the family as a pillar. The family gives us identity. That's where everything begins. Father, mother, children. That's how families are supposed to be. Father, mother, children. Not father, father, children, or mother, mother, children. Father, mother, children. The family gives us identity. The family is the first pillar of society. Second is culture. Culture gives us meaning. We interpret what happens around us through the eyes of our culture. Our sense of meaning comes through our culture. Culture is very powerful. Whoever touches your culture messes with your mind. Education, third pillar, teaches us what we know. What we know is given to us in a classroom. So can you imagine if the person who is teaching you deliberately misinforms you? The fourth is the media. The media tells us what is happening. That's how we get to know what's happening all around us. The media is very powerful. Have you ever thought about the fact that when you're watching television, you are only seeing what the cameraman wants you to see? There may be 1,000 different things happening, but he's only going to give you an angle that he wants you to see, which may not be the full picture. When you're listening to news, you're only hearing what the newsreader is telling you, not the entire story as it unfolded. The media is very powerful because it has a narrow point of reference, but it broadcasts that narrow point of reference to everybody. The fifth pillar of society is science. Science shows us what is possible. Innovation, technology. And science can do good things and bad things at the same time. The sixth pillar of society is business. Business determines who has money and who doesn't have money. It controls money. I have a small app on my device, and it shows air traffic all over the world. It's a very interesting app. Once in a while, I just go and watch how the planes are moving, and you can track almost every plane in the sky at every point in time. And when I look at traffic movement, the traffic movement is mostly from America to Europe. And there are so many planes going from America to Europe. and you look down, there's another continent there called Africa. And there's very little movement, just a few sprinkles of plains. So all the business is happening on top of the head of Africa. It's not happening to Africa. That's why only 2% of the wealth of the world is moving on the African continent. Somebody has determined to let the planes fly on top of our head and not across us, but that's going to change. Business is the sixth pillar, and the seventh pillar is government. Government determines who rules us and who manages us. At every point in time, we are dealing with these seven pillars. And when we talk about in the corridors of power, we are talking about who controls these pillars of society, who determines where they are placed and how they function. I'm going to use an analogy in the Bible to try to give you a picture of what can happen to pillars. And I'm going to use something in the life of Samson. So go with me quickly to the book of Judges. Judges chapter 16. There's a story of Samson there. This is after Samson has been overpowered. His hair has been cut off. And now they want to play games with him. Judges chapter 16 from verse 25 to 26. It says, so it happened when their hearts were merry that they said, call for Samson that he may perform for us. So they called for Samson from the prison, and he performed for them, and they stationed him between the pillars. Then Samson said to the lad who held his hand, said to the lad who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars which support the temple so that I can lean on them. Verse 29. So Samson took hold of the two middle pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them, one on his right, the other on his left. Then Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he pushed with all his might that the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he had killed his life. Now Samson wants to fight the Philistines. But he's one, and he's blind. And he cannot take on everybody. He cannot fight everybody. He cannot go to everybody and fight them. First, he cannot see them, and he has been weakened. But he has one last opportunity, and look at how strategic Samson is. He doesn't say, let me go to the people to fight them. He says, let me find the pillar that supports the structure. And so they take him to the pillars that support the structure, and he pushes against the pillars. And when the pillars are out of the way, the whole system collapses and the people are killed. There are people I call the Samsons of this world who take hold of the pillars of society and are able to shift them. And when they shift them, the whole society collapses. And sometimes when they are shifting them, we don't see. They may be shifting them in a classroom. They may be shifting them in a science lab. They may be shifting them on the media. But they take hold of the things that have held society for so long and move them out of the way. And in our time, we have seen people moving the pillars of society and shifting the structures of society. They have learned how to disorganize entire communities simply by shifting the pillars. The pillar of family has been shifted. It's been shifted. Because some people took hold of that pillar and shifted it. And whilst they were shifting it, they were not fighting us directly, but they were manipulating the systems that govern society. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we may pray all the prayer in the church, But until we become strategic to understand how the power systems of this world govern, they would isolate the church in our church rooms, in our chapels, and disrupt everything else. By the time you send your children to the educational system, by the time you engage the world, you realize the reality of your church doesn't reflect anywhere else, because somebody has shifted the pillars of society. And we are determined in our day not to be Philistines, but to be Samsons. And we are not going to allow people to shift the system on us. We're going to hold the pillars of righteousness and establish Christ in our society. And I trust that in this series, as I teach, you would go beyond just seeking God to bless you to becoming influential in your society. Whether you're a teacher in the classroom, or you're a nurse, or you're a scientist, or you're a banker, or you're a business person, or a preacher, we're not just making ourselves happy. We are establishing the kingdom of God and of His Christ. And that has to come when we understand the systems of this world. In the book, in Shakespeare's play, the Hamlet soliloquy, there is a point where he makes this comment, which is very popular, when Hamlet is now considering whether to avenge his father's murder or not to avenge his father's murder. And he asks the question, to be or not to be, that is the question. And I think that is a question a lot of Christians are asking. Should we go into power or not to be? Should we, Christians like to pray for God to give them leaders, but they don't want to be the leaders. We want God to use leaders, but we don't want to be the leaders. To be or not to be. Psalm 111 verse 3 says, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? You have a president now because he put himself there. You may not like it. You may hate him. You may criticize all you want, but until somebody steps up to the corridors of power, they remain in their bedroom or their sitting room. Somebody has to step up. And if you don't step up, somebody will step up. And it's time for Christians to determine we're not just going to complain about the people in power. We are going to step into the corridors of power. Ecclesiastes chapter 10 verse 5 to 7. Very powerful verse. It says, there is an evil I have seen under the sun, an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in dignity, while the rich sit in a lowly place. I have seen servants on horses, while princes walk on the ground like servants. Most of the people who are in the corridors of power are not fit to be in the corridors of power, but they are there anyway. Many of those who determine how we live our lives have been failures at their own lives, but they determine our lives anyway. Anytime I watch movies, and I watch all these nice movies, especially, the romantic movies, the ladies like watching them. And you see these nice ladies and men, and they know how to fall in love and stay in love, and they make your heart flutter, and they seem to know it all. And then the next thing you read, they are divorcing. And they marry again and they divorce. And they marry again and they divorce. But when they make the movie, they tell you they have all the answers. If they knew how to fix their lives, why couldn't they fix their marriage? So there are many people who are experts at telling us how to live our lives who have no clue how to live their own lives. The era of leadership is when foolishness is dignified and skill is devalued. When the non-achiever leads and instructs the achiever. When the righteous step back and the wicked step forward. God is looking for people to use. God is speaking to the church. It's time to rise into the corridors of power. Daniel functioned there. David functioned there. As a matter of fact, much of the patriarchs of our faith were not preachers. David was not just a preacher. He was a statesman and an army general. Solomon was a poet and a songwriter. And you look at all these people, and a politician. You look at Daniel, was not just a prophet, he was a public servant who served under different governments. They learned how to put their faith in the public space. And I believe the time has come for a new generation of Christians who don't just read the Bible in church, but read the Bible in the corridors of power. Righteousness must be established in the corridors of power, not just in the church, but in the corridors of power. When you look,
we've come to the end of this video. We believe you've been blessed. Remember, God's love is steadfast and unchanging. May His grace and peace be with you always. If you're new here, consider subscribing to stay up to date with our videos. Kindly share this video with your friends and families. You can watch this next video on your screen.